Welcome to Who We Are and What We Need. I'm your host, Quiring. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and an advocate for needs-honoring, needs-based society. In this podcast, we talk about how to trust and care for yourself as a person cares and feels deeply, how to understand the inner physics of human nature and our place in the world where we can flow and live harmoniously, how to support each other, thrive, and collectively challenge worldviews and systems that feed off of and perpetuate harm. In this podcast, we gently blow away the layers of noise, chaos, and reactivity so we can get to who we truly are and what we need. Thanks for joining me. I'm so glad you're here.
Welcome back to Who We Are and What We Need. I'm your host, Quiring, and today I am so pleased I have with me Tammy Chow, who I originally heard of and found through her leadership in the Beyond the Wound conference, which was several years ago, about healing from religious trauma. And I'm going to give you her whole blurb, which is really amazing. Tammy is a somatic-experiencing and attachment-repatterning practitioner, body temple dance facilitator, spiritual alignment guide, artist, and designer. Love the multi-passionate. Her devotion to helping women heal from trauma is greatly inspired by her lived experience as a child of an alcoholic and her journey of overcoming the sexual trauma, bulimia, body dysmorphia, disorganized attachment, severe depression, suicidal ideation, hypervigilance, anxiety, and low self-worth that plagued a third of her life. Tammy's practice is a result of her transformative healing journey back to self and dedication as a facilitator and forever student of somatic therapy, embodied movement, art, connection with spirit, and ancestral guidance. Her work weaves together somatics, neuroscience, creativity, and spirituality to help women transform trauma, reconnect with their intuition, and break free from the internalized expectations that keep them from experiencing the uninhibited expression, power, and expansiveness that is their birthright. Wow, that's amazing right there. I'm just like, feel like that's a wrap, but we're just getting started.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Yeah, I was like, I've never had it read to me before, and it's so strange thinking, not being in a corporate job anymore, that that's my resume now.
So amazing. Yeah, and you get to change it and add to it anytime you want.
Exactly. The title changes all the time.
Yeah, so great. I love it. So I am about to join Tammy's group that we're about to start at the time of this taping, which is in September and 2024. And when this is coming out, we will probably be in the middle of the group, but we're going to start exploring a lot of the ideas that Tammy has come up with that are going to be a part of it that just light me up and make me so excited. So I'm wondering if you want to start with like divine inner union or your idea about the Trinity.
Yeah.
That would be helpful. Or
So,
share like maybe the title of the group and everything, because I'm like afraid I'm going to get it wrong.
yeah, so our 6-month container that we'll be in soon is Awakening the Wild Woman. And it was just really born from so much of my personal experience. But like the final push was this like really dark night of the soul 3 years ago that at one point I put my head underwater in the bathtub because I was like, this pain is too great. And then I kind of like felt this voice from inside my womb that was like, there must be another way. And from that, it was like all the themes that I went through to see all of the invisible layers that held my body, whether it was like patriarchy, capitalism, like um, you know, beauty standards or just like good girl syndrome, like all of this invisible stuff that we are taught that holds our bodies in place and trapped with all of this energy. And reclaiming my sexuality and starting to parse apart like how I was dressing for the male gaze and like so many themes.
Mhm.
This period of self-discovery is basically what turned into Awakening the Wild Woman. And it's really to me a path of unraveling fully like why is being enough so radical,
Yes,
but it's
right.
it seems like that was my entire journey to just get to a place where I feel enough in my naked
Right.
authenticity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And that living in that in a world that says that's not okay or reacts certain ways to it. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes not even outright. Like there's so much that's like covert. Is that the right
Hmm.
covert is like when it's not
Yeah. Right.
obvious.
Subtle. Yes.
Subtle, like all of these things like um yeah, I don't want to get into divine union, but
Well,
like
that's okay. We'll come to that. I got it written down. I mean, that makes me think too, keep going with that, but like how I'm parenting young children right now. And
Mhm.
like, how do I let them have free spirits when you're supposed to teach them how to sit still and be quiet and do like you're supposed to teach them these social norms, right? And I have
Yeah,
such conflicted feelings about that.
totally. And I'm not a parent, so I'm not going to be the, you know what I mean? Like I
Right.
feel like each of us are trying to figure this out.
But I'm saying like I am watching the making of it, right?
Mm,
Like this is
right.
part of how it was made for us.
Yeah, exactly.
It
Like
feels so invisible to us.
right. And also the fact that you're asking these questions and like you're conscious enough is the difference, you know?
Right.
And you know about the repair that can happen even after you do something wrong. And like if
Yes.
you were to tell
Right.
your child, like, I shouldn't have said that, right? Gabor Mate talks about that. Like
Yeah.
that's all that was
Yes.
that matters
And
that we
I've come
didn't
up with
get.
I mean, maybe somebody else has come up with these before me, but like emotional integrity, emotional honesty, which has been really important to me as someone who's so intuitive and
Mhm.
empathic that I didn't get enough of that. And so I am very consciously, like, very clear
Yeah,
in who I am and like
exactly.
my expectations, which are, yeah, mostly for their well-being, right? And this just like
Yeah,
discovery more than top down, like be a certain way, I think is generally how
totally.
I am.
Yeah, I mean, even as you said, what did you just say? Like discovery and you're
Right. Like,
clear. Clear, like
yeah.
my whole nervous system just settled down because my
Mm,
parents were not clear. There were no instructions. There were
right.
like vague expectations and then repercussions if I didn't live up to them, and
Right.
expectations that I should know how to do everything, you know, because they had to figure that out as immigrants.
Right.
And that is the opposite of safe. That feels terrifying, you know?
Right. Well, and I've heard so many people, even in just a generational level of trauma, of even outside of having like an alcoholic family, maybe where there is this very clear secret that you're supposed to keep, or, ways of
Yeah.
being family that you're supposed to keep is like one of the unofficial rules, right? Like,
Right.
so many people have felt that because the image of the family was more important than the well-being of the family, right? And
Yeah. Is
so much had to stay contained, and it was all about image. It wasn't about clarity and about well-being
right. Is
for
there
survival.
a psychological term for that? Like there's like this preserving the family image, like this perfect
Uh,
family,
I don't know. I mean, to me, it makes me think of like 1950s American standards, but I don't know
right?
like what that would, the perfect family. I don't know other
Right.
than that what a like short term would be for it, but I'd love to hear it
Yeah.
if anybody knows.
Yeah. I just didn't know if that was like a thing. But yeah, I that's another example of like covert, right? Wait,
Mhm.
overt is
Yes.
obvious, covert
Yes.
is hidden.
Yes.
Yeah, that I think a lot of people are waking up to now, you know, where
Mhm.
sometimes people are like, I had a wonderful childhood. My parents
Mhm.
loved me. And
Right.
I think, you know, the work isn't about how do we tear that apart and start blaming them, but, you know, there are ways in which preserving the family image leaves us stunting our own authenticity in our lives to move forward with our unique gifts and what
Right.
we're meant to bring into this lifetime.
Right. Yeah. Just if it's unexamined, right? There doesn't have to be blame and criticism, but there might have to be a lot of rage and grief and like
Yeah,
work that you didn't get to do for autonomy before or things like
right.
that. Right.
Exactly. And I get that it can feel daunting for people when it's like rage and grief, you know, of course, you know, our egos have kept us safe from that forever. But on the other side of it is so much more love and aliveness and creativity. where people are like, wow, I did not know I had the capacity or the
Right.
ability to be this
Right. Right.
joyful almost because I've
I
gone the other way now.
I think if it helps too, the two main pieces of work that I can think of right off the bat with that is grief work, right? So grief often involves anger, rage, but it involves other things as well, right? That the grief process and there's reclaiming these developmental milestones that we didn't always get to have.
Mm-hmm.
Or, one of those is autonomy, which
Mm-hmm.
is one that I didn't have. So I tend to focus on and learning self-trust and mm, all sorts of other things. I was just mapping some out this morning that it, I was kind of mapping each like trauma response that we have because they kind of go in order. When you can't, one doesn't work, then you go to the next survival thing. And like what
Mm.
happens if you meet that, then you keep coming down this like ladder basically until you don't have to have a trauma response. So I started with like our multiple realities. So like as children, we only know one reality. First, we're part of another who we cling to and cry for. Then we become more independent, knowing our own strength of will and mind and heart. We learn our bodies and their ability to jump and play. We learn our voice, our first protest, our first defense of inherent value. I matter, what I want matters, and our first assertion of self agency. I can, and a self led life, I will. We know we are one of many. We do not exist alone, but there is only one way of seeing and interpreting it. At the beginning, like it's just our little child view, right? And then, like around 6 or 7, we start learning that we're interacting with and reacting to life around us in a different way. There's a different like self-awareness, right? And that each of us perceives the world separately and differently, and people are reacting to what we're doing. And that can feel really scary and hard without any interpretation. Like a lot of core beliefs, like you see in Inside Out 2, are formed
Yeah.
around this age, I think,
Yeah.
because there's enough self-awareness to start noticing that and not enough support to interpret it and with compassion and support.
Yeah.
Right? That yes, I can hurt people and they can hurt me, but it doesn't have to do with who I am as a person. It's more
Right.
about behaviors and reactions, right? But
Right.
in that age, we interpret it as our identity. And then from that, I was going through like an exploration of our coping strategies. So the first one that we reach for is an attachment cry. Um, so that basically is like, I can reach or ask for help, and then someone will meet me there. Or
Mm-hmm.
I can at least have enough courage to do that with
Mm-hmm.
the understanding that, like, if that person doesn't, I can go to someone else and I'm worthy of that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
safe enough to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that didn't happen for so many people, right? Where you couldn't ask for anything. You were just told what you were supposed to do, or it wasn't safe enough to use your voice. And
Mm-hmm.
so the attachment cry piece is still there. Um, and the way it's healed is by like saying like, I know you, you love me, you care for me, don't leave me, I need you,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we can learn to ask and reach and demand even with our cries in our voice, to say that I matter and I can ask for help meeting my needs. There's relationship and sustenance for us. And then the next coping or trauma reaction is flight. So that to me is this period of time when we're kids where we play hide and seek and peekaboo, right? There's like everyone goes through that. And there's
Mm-hmm.
this idea of we know we're separate beings, and there's delight in both the hiding and the being found, and
Mm-hmm.
delight in us as the ones being found, right? Like we become more secure in our self knowledge as separate and wanted beings,
Mm-hmm.
um, is my interpretation of that. And it's interesting to me, back when I worked with kids in a residential setting, we played any version of that you can imagine. Like we'd hide objects and look for them, find and, search and find different things. We'd even play peekaboo, like with like much older kids because they really
Yeah.
needed this, right?
Yeah.
There's something so needed and magical about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one is fight. So that we start off with like independence, a demand for autonomy, our voice of protest. I'm old enough to do that on my own, is what my youngest child is saying right now. I'm old enough to
Mm-hmm.
decide, I want to say. And we can learn that assertiveness is effective and that fight is too much. Um, and on the other hand, like obedience alone makes adults happy, but it doesn't make us happy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So finding that sweet spot of assertiveness is kind of that work around there. And then the next one, if fight doesn't work, you go to freeze, where your whole body is tense and it's
Mm-hmm.
frozen. And that's often like a breath in that never gets an exhale, or it's like you want to cry, but that's not allowed. And so it gets stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that feels kind of like life is too much. When it is, we can sniffle, sob, yell, meltdown. Can we let it go? And then if we can release it without hurting others, then we've like, I don't know, I said mastered the stage, but if not, we freeze, and it becomes that quick inhale with no release. And I lived most of my life that way since 6 or 7 until I started doing a lot of
Same.
until therapy.
Yeah.
Um, and then like learning that I can be messy and noisy again and like
Mm-hmm.
be just myself. And that's part of the reason that I have one more, but that's part of the reason I was really drawn to your group that you're doing is I really wanted like a collective space to wail and grieve and weep and yell and rage and not just on my own. Like I feel like I'm doing it
Yeah.
inside and that's really bringing a lot of relief, but like I need a place to do it with people and externally.
Yeah.
And let me say the last one, and then we can go to that. If you can't even like, if freeze doesn't work, then you go to the like full collapse where it's like a possum, collapsing. They're not just playing dead, like they actually like their nervous system shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
um, and like that's when life demands more than we've got. Can like reclaiming that is can we collapse and rest? Like, can we hibernate or do we have to play dead
Mm-hmm.
to evade a
Right.
threat or snuff out our life force or whatever kind of thing? So,
Right.
those are my
Ooh.
thoughts about all of that.
I love that. It's you're sort of investigating like the shadow and the light actually for all of
Mhm.
the responses. And sometimes all of the responses get such a bad rep, you know?
Yes.
And then one more that like was so much of my life too, fawn.
Oh, yes. I didn't, because that one isn't in the like chart, but yeah, that was like my whole life. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it happens
I
more to
think
women.
freeze. I think it goes along with freeze a lot. I don't
It,
know. Even though it's a
y-
separate thing. It is
right.
separate fawn, please accommodate.
Yeah, please accommodate. Because it's like sometimes it's a functional, you're in motion. You're not like
Yeah.
just frozen, but you're
Right.
perpetually pleasing
Yeah.
in order to like survive,
Right.
basically.
Right.
But then I feel like investigating, and it's funny because fawn is like a big one for me and the women that I work with, because I'm so
Yes.
much about unraveling from the good girl and coming
Right.
into our wild woman or
Mm-hmm.
our, our dark goddess, all of this
Yep.
stuff.
Yes.
There is a light to fawn too. The
Yes.
darkness would be people pleasing, abandoning self, you know, um, having that like plastered good girl frozen smile on while
Oh,
like
yeah, you
there's
had that too. Yeah, I had
while
that.
there's inner turmoil. Oh yeah,
Yes.
definitely. And it's still present like in one of my
Yes.
containers in like the art of relating, that's what it was called. Like
Yes, I did that with
called
you. It's so lovely.
wait, you did?
Well, I
Huh.
didn't do the whole thing. I did the like your one little
Oh,
like
okay.
preview thing before you started
Oh, got it. Yes.
the thing.
Right.
Yes.
And there was like this thing in the preview, I mean, in the container that's called birthday circling. So, circling is kind of the process of like just disclosing our internal experience through sensations, emotions, our assumptions, judgments, but owning them, within group, which we don't get to do often. Like, how much, like, if
Right.
say I'm hanging out with you, Catherine, am I like, oh, I just noticed like when you raised your eyebrows, there was like a bit of
Mm-hmm.
terror in me. And the thought that I had
Mm.
was like, she's judging me, and
Yeah,
then for you to
right.
get to share, like, oh, what was happening for me is I was actually
Right.
interested in what you were saying.
Right.
And that right there is a reparative attachment experience that,
Yes.
you
In
know,
real time.
that happens in relationship. Exactly.
Yes.
And so in that, like we were doing this thing called birthday circling. And so I went first and my face was like this, like smile,
Mm,
like, because everybody was looking at me and I was describing my internal experience. And I do it through the SE lens, like somatic experiencing, like
mhm.
imagination, movement, all this stuff. So I was like, the image in my mind right now is Britney Spears in her conservatorship. And I don't know if you know
Mhm.
about that. Did you hear
Just
about
a
that?
little bit. Yes.
Yeah, how she was like controlled by her father
Yeah.
legally
Right.
her whole life. And then my co-facilitator was like, "Wow, it's really interesting that that's your experience right now because on the outside, the way that your face is, like I'm experiencing warmth from you. I'm
Mm,
experiencing welcome, whereas like
mm,
my internal experience was terror. Like
yeah.
my chest was clenched,
Right.
my throat was clenched, I was cold." And so slowing down and being witnessed in that way, like when she mirrored that to me, the next thing that happened after that was tears. And that's me
Yeah.
starting to come out of that fawn, that freezy fawn, because it's like somebody
Right.
actually sees my internal experience. And then my face, like the muscles, like started like melting and started becoming more
Wow.
neutral, like to
Yeah.
like actually
Right.
what I was experiencing. Yeah. So that's my fawn experience. And then
So
like,
interesting.
yeah. But I think the light side of that is like reclaiming, like, I still, I'm pleasant. I love
Yeah.
hosting. Like, I
Yeah.
love being warm. And,
Hmm.
I learned that through maybe my fawn response and getting to reclaim that part feels good
Right.
now.
Well, I guess I wonder if that's your natural way of being and it just got more rigid than it needed to be and more extreme than it needed to be to help you cope.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's my natural way of being. And I also believe that we're like the full spectrum, right? That's my
Hmm.
natural way of
Yes.
being for some of the time. And then some
Right.
of the other time, I'm a fucking
Right.
ugly gremlin wild woman,
Yes.
you
Love
know?
it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting to me. I don't know how much of this I'll include in the podcast or not, but my husband has like a leadership role over lots of people, and it's really important to him in general as a person. And I think with that, to not be messy.
Hmm.
And that's been really hard for me. Like he's very image conscious,
Yeah.
and um, I don't always know what to do with this path of growth that I'm on because I'm going to do it for myself and also
Yeah.
like be like I hear you and um our growth patterns don't always like align, and it's okay that he has his in his time, but it's
Hmm.
also strange.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, that's one that we like rub up against each other a lot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can imagine. And that's the nature of relating. It's just messy.
Yep. Yep.
And that reminds me of what you were saying when we go from basically, it's like there's no guidance between us moving from childhood as things being a universal truth, right? Like our perception
Right.
of the world, of what our parents fed us or whoever, those
Right.
are universal truths. And we are like, I'm holding to that identity forever. And then as
Right.
we grow up and we start relating with other people, well, then we like if we imagine like we each have our own bubbles of universal truths, like
Mm-hmm.
you have that and then the other person has that. And then we like come into connection, like they bump up against each other.
Right.
And I think the education that's missing here that like I'm really passionate about is conflict resolution and also
Yes.
how to hold or have capacity to hold multiple perspectives and that,
Yeah.
both realities are true.
Right.
And I,
And how do you hold that in your nervous system,
mhm,
right? And not just in your
yeah,
mind,
totally.
right? Because
Oh my God.
that's the really hard part, isn't it?
Right, right.
Get in my mind.
Yeah, like when I was in my 6-year relationship and he kept on telling me that I
Oh,
needed to learn nonviolent communication. And,
Gosh.
I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a practitioner, like, but I was the most defensive person because I, in my mind, could be like, yeah, you have your
Right.
perspective and I have mine. But what was my body doing? It was
Right.
completely stone cold. Like, you couldn't even, like, if you threw
Mm-hmm.
like iron at it,
Yep.
you couldn't
Yep.
penetrate it. And how can I expect for us to have intimacy or closeness or attraction with that,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
Yeah, I was
so,
thinking earlier when you're talking about the like smile on your face and the openness outwardly, right? Like I know for me, inside then was like tense. And like I'm
mhm.
still doing a lot of like massage and stuff to release that
Yeah,
because my body has held so much of that for me, right?
yeah,
This like first layer of openness and then after that, like shut things down. There has
right.
to be protection. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as we get into our bodies and it's not linear. And sometimes we get to a place of safety in our bodies where the old habits like really show up, And like, I think part of the work is us deconditioning from this linear way or like this masculine way of achievement that the spiritual
Yeah.
journey has been
Right.
marketed to us as. It's
Mm-hmm.
not that. It's unraveling and it's like also welcoming when my fucking crazy gremlins from like when I was 16 show up after I've done like all
Mhm.
this work and I'm
Oh
like,
gosh,
why are you
no.
here? Like I'm on the precipice of
Mm,
starting my practice and here's all the stuff. But now to me, the dark goddess path is actually welcoming it.
mm.
Um, have you
Yeah, I
have we
was
talked
gonna
about
ask
the
about like the female archetypes in general that you resonate with or that you've been drawn to or been
yeah.
important for you, because I know the wild woman is just one of them.
Yeah. Did we talk about Existential Kink, the book by Carolyn
No.
Elliott? So
Mm-mm.
I just finished a podcast and we talk about that. But that's the way I see triggers or relationship conflict. And, when those darker layers of myself come up now, I kind of have like an air of excitement and of like
Mm,
Existential Kink is a book that's basically all about the dark goddess. And like in there,
I love
she
that.
kind of opens up the book talking about the Persephone myth. And I guess, as most of us know, the Persephone myth, she was first raped by Hades, who was like
Hmm.
the god of the underworld, which is
Right.
how she became the queen of the underworld. But then the author says that before this like Greco-Roman takeover of that version of the story and like Christianity and everything, Persephone was actually known as the queen of the underworld before that. And so then
Oh,
she's like, what
wow.
if we think about it differently? Like Persephone was the queen of the underworld, and she actually created Hades to come down and basically like violate her or whatever so that she could experience what separation is and so that she
Hmm.
can choose like this life. And essentially, that's kind of the metaphor for our souls having chose this human earthly life.
Hmm.
And
Right.
it's taken a while for me to start actually really feeling and seeing it that way and seeing our suffering as like, I chose this actually. Um, and it's just a lot. That's a huge resource for me for this
Yeah.
kind of work.
Have you read Audre Lorde's like The Power of the Erotic, I think it is, and
No, I've
the
heard of
or The
it.
Power of Poetry? I forget. That was my first entrance that I remember into like these dark, deep places being wonderful.
Hmm.
Because I do think like with the fawn and the people pleasing, it felt like the light, happy, like whatever that needed to be like the only way of
Yeah.
being, right?
Vanilla.
Um,
One note.
okay, so I got the names now. The two essays are Poetry is Not a Luxury and
Love.
Uses of the Erotic. So let's see. In Poetry is Not a Luxury, this is part of it. For each of us as women, there is a dark place within where hidden and growing our true spirit rises, beautiful and tough as chestnut, stanchion against your nightmare of weakness and of impotence. These places of possibility within ourselves are dark because they are ancient and hidden. They have survived and grown strong through that darkness.
Within these deep places, each one of us holds an incredible reserve of creativity and power, of unexamined and unrecorded emotion and feeling. The woman's place of power within each of us is neither white nor surface. It is dark, it is ancient, and it is deep. When we view living in the European mode only as a problem to be solved, we rely solely upon our ideas to make us free, for these were what the white fathers told us were precious. And then she goes into, more about that. Just incredible. Yeah, that one has, we have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings. But once
Mm-hmm.
recognized, those which do not enhance our future lose their power and can be altered. The fear of our desires keeps them suspect and indiscriminately powerful, for to suppress any truth is to give it strength beyond endurance. When we live outside of ourselves, and by that I mean on external directives only, rather than from our internal knowledge and needs, when we live away from those erotic guides from within ourselves, then our lives are limited by external and alien forms, and we conform to the needs of a structure that is not based on human need, let alone in individuals. But when we begin to live from within outward, in touch with the power of the erotic within ourselves, and allowing that power to inform and illuminate our actions upon the world around us, then we begin to be responsible to ourselves in the deepest sense.
That like the first time I did circling, I was in Guatemala with my co-facilitator. That's how I met her. And I was the only one that showed up that week. And so we were
Mm.
like in 2.5 hours of just relating like that, slowed down, meditative. And at some point I was like, I just have this desire to be ugly. And
Mhm.
she said, she's like, oh, I have a curiosity about this desire. Like, can you expand on that a little bit more? And I think at the time I used to say canceled, but I think I was bullied for that video. I
Mm.
made a video that went really viral that I received a lot of hate for. I've
Mm.
learned a lot from it, but I was receiving like a lot of misogyny, a lot of like, why are you throwing a
Mhm.
tantrum online? I mean, I was like shaking for trauma release. So it's like a
Right.
processing technique.
Yes. Right.
Um, but comments like, oh, you look like you're 40. Why are you acting like
Oh
a
gosh.
child? Like, oh, crazy ass woman. Like, of
Which is all the
course.
reasons we learn not to do this, even though our bodies need
Exactly.
it to release.
Exactly. And so there,
Mm.
I moved through a lot of that, but there was a lot of rage that I felt about the whole experience because it felt like I needed energy to move out and to be seen as ugly. Like, honestly,
Right.
there was this like deep internal desire in me to be seen ugly, right? Like, I
Yes.
mean, I love design, I love creating beauty, I love dressing up. But at the same
Right.
time, also like how much of my value was given to how beautiful I would be, or like how much was I
Right.
criticized for like my nose not like being too
Right.
flat or being too short or
Right.
whatever. It was like my entire worth was based on my looks. And so
Right.
there was this deep gremlin-y desire just to be seen in my ugliness, like blah. And when we sat with it more, I started like contorting my face and sticking out my tongue and like doing things that would be unacceptable, but it felt so nourishing to just for her to watch me, for to
Mm.
witness me. And we're actually
Yes.
going to be doing some of that in Awakening the Wild Woman
Oh,
through
that's
ritual
great.
theater.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Yes, like outing our shadows. Like what happens when we get to embody
Yes.
it? It's
Yes.
so
Then
fun.
it feels like it becomes the yin and the yang, right? Like that it's in its proper place in some ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like we learn best when we're in an environment of creativity and play and
Yeah.
compassion, like you were
Yeah.
talking about earlier,
Yep. And imagination,
and
which is part of that.
imagination. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I was going to ask, you mentioned some of those were like part of the somatic experiencing lens, and I've learned some about it, but I'm not as well versed in it as you. And I was curious if there were any other like main hallmarks around that. Like you were saying,
Hmm.
movement and imagination, and like, is there anything
Yeah.
else that comes to your mind? You don't have to like remember all of them, but
Yeah, so in somatic experiencing, they teach it like with the acronym SciBAM. And then I've like added one more from my teacher, Adriana, and I kind of break it down so like they're not as technical terms, but they're basically your body's 6 channels of knowing. And so,
ooh,
we've been taught, we know well the meaning and thoughts and brain like channel, right? that's like programmed into us. But then we learn in somatics like sensation, imagination, movement, emotion, meaning, which is kind of like with the thought, but also like around metaphor and the meaning we make out of things. And then Adriana, through my body temple training, she also includes sound as one of the languages of the body. And so the more we get to sink into those channels of knowing, I've found, or this is my like summary of it, I've found my, I don't, psychic abilities or more clairvoyant or intuitive
Yes.
or
Yes.
channeling or
Well, I
connected,
was
right?
wondering if that was an another sense or if that's part of sensation. Like I was going to add something like that. Like
I I
I don't know if
think,
it's just part of emotional.
yeah. To me, I mean, I guess like when I was younger, and like I've always been deeply spiritual, and I feel
Hmm.
like I've always been waiting for, whenever you read people being like, I heard
Yes.
this voice, and then
Yes.
God came to me, and then,
Yes.
I'm like, I'm waiting for the day that my powers suddenly turn on,
It's so
Like
great. I love
what?
that.
I'm like, I know I'm connected, but why didn't I get that gift of seeing the image? But then now I realize that it's actually the five channels of knowing that are that. And
Yes.
so to me, that's why I'm so passionate about teaching through this lens is like, it's not just like, oh, somebody's born with these. And maybe there are. Like, I think some people are born with like super clairvoyant abilities and we each have
Hmm.
different
Right.
gifts. But for me, this is what I've found is my way of being connected to source
Yes.
and guidance
Right.
and
Right.
clairvoyance.
That's really cool. Yeah, I've just been taking on the term clairsentience like
Love
as
it.
well with the empathic, intuitive like abilities that is part of what makes me a great counselor, right? Because I can
Yeah.
sit here and I can feel your feelings with you. Like I can
Yeah.
tell if
Right.
you're being honest with yourself, right? And you're really present, like
Yeah.
I'm like right there with you. It's like I love
Yeah.
being in my own inner world and I love connecting to your inner world. Like I'm not going
Totally.
in it, right? But I'm present. I'm so present and like honoring that space that
Totally.
you have there. Yeah.
Yeah, like when I first started my practice, I went into a very scientific route. Like I wanted to make sure I had the SE training. Like I wanted
Right.
to be I didn't want to just like be another practitioner out there
Right.
claiming to be a trauma
Right. Just
informed
spiritual
coach.
coach. Right. Yes.
Exactly. Not that
Right.
there's,
It's
we
so
all start
hard.
from somewhere, but
Right.
I was very Asian about it. I was like, no, I
Yes.
must be doing the right thing. The
Oh, I
good girl
know.
part of me.
I know.
I don't regret. I'm glad that I did my due diligence. And you were saying, oh, right. And so I really appreciate that education for me. But at the same time, in my somatic experiencing training, I was like, why is nobody talking about spirit? Like this whole
Hmm.
thing is all like, I'm like, I mean, my ancestors are like waking up in my bones. This is all like Taoism, Buddhism, like all of these concepts
Hmm.
trace back
Yes.
to me, Eastern traditions or shamanic
Yes.
traditions.
Yes.
And then I've been recently getting more into family constellations work. Have you done any of that?
No, I'm so intrigued.
Oh my God, it's a group modality that incorporates like the somatic experience of like those channels, but I think more in a group context where you're mapping out people's like family structure and like seeing
Hmm.
where in the lineage something got broken and being able to heal it. And like the coolest
Oh,
experience,
so
yeah,
exciting.
right. Like if we were in the group together and say I was the client, I would like look around and maybe I would choose somebody to represent my mom. So I might be like,
Hmm.
Catherine, will you be the representative for my mom? And then you would step into the field. And I mean, this actually happened in real life. Like
Hmm.
what happens is almost, it feels like you get possessed by her energy. Like, and you start to
Hmm.
say things that only I would know, like
Wow.
are attributed to my mom. Um, but anyway, as I got more into that work, it gave me more permission to realize, yes, there is absolutely an invisible field. And that's what's happening in my sessions.
Hmm.
And probably
Yeah,
like what you're
right.
speaking
Yeah,
to is like,
right,
it's not just you, the practitioner, and
right,
just them.
right.
There's an invisible field of consciousness
Yeah, I'm
that
so
like
aware of the interconnectedness. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
It directs the session. Like part of my prayer
right.
before my sessions is like I open up my body as a vessel for source to work through me, and I am simply the conduit through which energy reorganizes itself. you
I like
know?
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I still have a hard time with the word surrender personally from my own like religious trauma. But it's been really nice to hear people like you, and I've like a soul called Joel, or soul named Joel. I forget what his moniker is for
Oh,
his
yeah.
music. Is just excellent. He was in Beyond the Wound as well, and like talks about surrender and flow, and just someone else that came to mind who I like. This still feels hard to me, but I also have a hard time with like I met with a shaman once. I really liked what she was doing, and it was just so hard to integrate the
Mm,
information, even though it was accurate,
hmm
um, because it came from outside of myself. And I've worked so hard to have self-knowing and self-trust. And like, I still am learning that, like that multiple reality thing, that's part of why I was thinking about that this morning. It was like,
hmm
when that feels really strong, it feels hard to stay like, how do you keep both and like
hmm
integrate them? So
hmm
anyway, that's been my experience so far with like more clairvoyant and like shamanic kind of things. And I'm curious how that's
Yeah.
been for you. It sounds like it's
Yeah.
been really rewarding.
So if I can kind of repeat back what I'm hearing, like how I'm interpreting that is you saying that you had a wonderful experience with like a shamanistic person,
Hmm.
but maybe it was butting up against your need for authenticity, individuality, like your own perspective.
And there wasn't
Um,
enough like consent based, exploration based kind of language around it. It was kind of
mm,
like, this is what I'm hearing from the guides, right?
right, right. Oh, got it. Are you willing to share any of it? And totally fine if you're not.
Oh, sure. I mean, it was kind of how I am, like a piece I just wrote that will have been out by the time this podcast airs, about realizing that I'm a gatherer, like both hunter gatherers and that wasn't the part with the shaman, but like the energy that I was like a butterfly or a bee or something like that, right? That's been going through this cocoon phase and just loves to flit through life. Like that's just that lens shine. And that's been reinforced through other things, which I can talk about. If you're not familiar with Asia Suler, by the way, she has a really cool, like little healing earth archetypes quiz. And I came out as a rainbow for that
Oh my
one,
gosh.
which is a
Love.
similar kind of shining, right? Which is this, like, I just kind of similar to before we started recording, I was saying part of the reason I do a podcast and that I share things is I just feel like anything I explore, like I go explore and I have to share it.
Mhm.
Explore, share, like shine, explore, share. Like that's
Yeah.
like part of my constellation.
Yeah.
And my husband is and he did this with Asia Suler's thing. It's more like a standing stone, and but with the shaman, it was more like it's grounding, like tree that's growing up is his growth, and
hmm
mine is flitting around. And like they can both exist with each other and do well. That was not clear from what the guides were saying. It was kind of
Okay.
like this may not work out, kind of thing. You guys are so different, and that's
Right.
not at all true. And so I think, but it is something we have to grow in, like, and talk
Mhm.
about and communicate about, right?
Mhm.
But that really like threw me off trying to figure that
Yeah.
out in this place of also like I love living in this soul space, right? Where it's
hmm
less practical and more soul filled.
hmm
And my husband is very practical and it's very hard for me to go back and forth, like
hmm
and transition in and out. Like I just want to stay in like soul space all the time
Right.
as much as possible on the edges of that.
Same.
Um, and so trying to figure out like, how do I share that part of me or can I,
hmm
and be in relationship in very more practical ways or ways that are connecting with like where he's at.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like you're, I don't know, I guess I wonder if the way that I would relate to your experience is like I work with a Vedic astrologer that I've worked with
Hmm.
for like the past
Oh,
four
cool.
years.
Uh-huh.
And I think probably because I come from some religious trauma as well, that I do have and also being made fun of for being mystical or spiritual my whole life,
Mhm, mhm.
I have a little built-in like hardcore discernment around
Yeah.
spiritual healers and stuff, maybe a
Yeah.
little bit
Right.
on the what's the word I'm looking for? Like when somebody's cynical, like more
But
on the
yeah.
cynical or
Suspicious. Yeah.
suspicious side,
Yeah.
just because of the world that we're living in right
Right.
now and the
Yes.
spiritual landscape.
Right.
So there are very few practitioners, and they will usually be vetted out by friends and friends and friends that have
Mhm.
used them for a while and that I really trust.
Yep.
Um, and like I don't often just like go to anybody because I am so
Mhm.
susceptible to kind of being hijacked when somebody
Right.
tells me
Right.
something about my life that
Right.
I'm like, oh, should I do this or should I not? And
Right.
I love my Vedic astrologer, but I have to remember at the end of the day, everybody who's a healer is human. And so
Right.
sometimes he'll say something in a session in the past that did get to me. And for example, freezing my eggs,
Mhm.
when I was in that dilemma
Mhm.
of being 30 and then
Right.
seeing if that was in the cards in my long-term relationship at the time. And it was just a lot of strife and turmoil, like feeling like I needed to make the right decision. And I think there was a conversation around doing that, like in my chart or something, that he'd rather me do it
Mhm.
sooner rather than later. And that kind of like fucked with me. And I'm not blaming him, but
Mhm.
I'm saying
Right.
that I struggled with for
Right.
the
Right.
year.
Which, I mean, is part of the reason for all of the white supremacy and colonization that's in disorder language that's in like therapy world, right? And in psychology, that is one of the things we learned as therapists is that I think is really helpful. And part of why, like, maybe you doing somatic experiencing, or for me, having the therapy base does help too, that it's always like, I'm feeling this way. Can I check that out with you? Right? Like, there's
Mhm.
always this,
Yeah.
or there should be this clear separation around
Right.
like, this is what I'm experiencing, what I really would love to see happen for you, right? Which might be
Yeah.
separate from what like intuitive sense they're getting from something.
Yeah. And who's to
Right.
say there's no right and wrong?
Right.
Because sometimes these are ancient practices that go
Right.
back, back and back and back.
Right.
So yeah, my experience
Right.
with it is like I also struggle with that. And
Right.
I tend to find practitioners who are more able to guide me into my own wisdom. Um, but aside from like those one or two triggers with my Vedic astrologer, though, I've seen him like twice a year for the last 4 years. And I
Mm,
honestly wouldn't even be in somatics if it weren't for him. I
wow.
wouldn't have left that 6 year relationship if I hadn't been working with him. So that's been also a huge resource and guidance for me. And it's
Yeah.
more like I've built the trust with him, and I also have
Mhm.
built the part of me that's like, I can still have autonomy and be discerning and toss out
Right.
something that
Right.
doesn't work for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like it helps you get clarity, right? And I think about that a lot, of the turn between clarity and certainty, right? That we're just
Mhm.
looking for a little more clarity sometimes. Right.
Yes. Or just like to
A little more
reinforce
guidance.
our intuition,
Yes. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Like I think it's a good session when I come out and I'm like, great, I was already thinking that,
Yes.
or I
Yes.
was already feeling that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm wondering if we can go into the divine interunion and the like Trinity concept that you
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
Definitely. I feel like archetypes, in the past with my like linear educational upbringing of the world, I was like, where
Hmm.
am I going to find the school
Oh,
that
I
teaches
know.
me all the right archetypes,
I
right?
know.
But
Where do you
actually,
start? That's what I've just been like
exactly. Like I want to know the
digging
right
these little
one for
things.
exactly. But what I find so fascinating about somatics is like that's kind of how, as I started learning the different channels of knowing, the archetypes came to me, whether they were through visions or just tapping into my
Mm,
curiosity. And so like the wild woman was just starting to happen because I was like moving to Santa Fe. I was just like more unraveling from all of that conditioning,
yeah.
and I felt like there was kind of a whisper that was like wild woman, and that was like
Mm,
2 or 3 years ago. And that's what was like awakening the wild woman. I think that's that's the group, you know?
I love that.
And then Kali, through my
Mhm.
work with Body Temple, Adriana, she's um teaches like the Indian mystical tradition, and we embody the different goddesses. And so
Cool.
like Kali's one of them, and we do a lot of mantra for like 21 days at a time. And the things that happen during those times that we're sitting in sadhana, it's like it's in almost direct relation, it feels like, to the goddess that we're
Mm,
embodying.
wow.
And so we'll be journeying through different goddesses like Lakshmi and Kali. And for me, why am I forgetting? Krishna and, oh my God, I'm totally blanking.
And that I know you can see it
Can I
right in
just look it
front of
up?
you. Yes.
Because she was a huge part of my path this past year. Krishna and Radha. Ah, yes. Radha was one that
Oh, there
really
you
I
go.
worked with because I've been, I've been on my healing journey for so long. And then the one thing that was kind of missing for me was deep soul nourishing, like romantic relationship. Like
Mm,
everything else, I had like kind of felt like I was like, okay, I figured out my business and intuition and my soul's calling. And then when it came to dating, like the image for me was like a shattered mirror. And
oh,
then my Vedic astrologer actually said, like in one of the hardest readings, he was like, "You're afraid of intimacy." And I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm a somatic practitioner." It was like so defensive. And he's like, "Yeah, that's why you're in a 6-year relationship with somebody who can't really meet you there. You're basically dating your dad, and you're not willing to look at this part of you." And that took me down the whole rabbit hole of understanding, really intimately getting to know attachment wounding, getting to know my own disorganized attachment, and starting to heal from that. And so the story of Radha and Krishna, like Radha is like um forever like devotional to Krishna, her partner, but he is like this playful, handsome man of the village, and he loves all women. Like he loves Radha, but he can't be faithful to just her. But she is completely faithful to him. And so a lot of her embodying her as a goddess really helped me through my codependency wound or my abandonment wound. And instead of
mm,
shaming that part of myself, getting to fully embody her, like, and transmuting my what I would call dependency or whatever,
mhm.
I had learned, into actual longing, and longing
Yeah.
for the beloved, for the divine, for my divine union with God. And that was super healing on my path. So that's like one example of how archetypes have really been such a huge part of my journey. And then, from there, sorry, Kuan Yin, who I have here on my desk. And
Oh, it's
I
okay.
journeyed with her for the past 2 years and recently learned from my grandmother that she um, grew up worshiping Kuan Yin, and that her grandmother
Oh,
taught her that. And I was like, so it's like also this ancestral journey, of these
oh, I
archetypes
love
that
that.
start waking up literally in our bones, like epigenetics.
Yes.
That's they come to us because they're part of us. And Joan of Arc and Mary Magdalene are the more recent ones now, but
Hmm.
we will be covering all of that in Awakening the Wild Woman.
Yay. So
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. I'm curious, what are archetypes that you've worked with?
Um, I haven't really delved into the goddess ones enough to know with them. Like I definitely have senses that maybe more like IFS parts, I don't know, but I've had like a roaring lion inside of me for a long time, like that I
Love.
can see and feel
Yeah.
like roaring for like healing and justice. Like I can just visualize it like putting that energy
Yes.
out like across the globe.
Yeah.
Um, a lot. And that's really lovely. That's something I've really resonated with personally that's
Mhm.
just come up for me organically.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, over a long time, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to watch you deepen into that in group and get
Yeah.
to share that and see how that expands and what else comes next with that too.
So tell me more about, I think the Trinity comes next, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I feel like after working with people for a while now and in my own practice, finally, describing my work has been a little bit easier recently. And what's been forming is this idea of the holy trinity of like wholeness or attachment. I don't really know the exact name or term yet,
Mm-hmm.
but having been raised in Christian or going to a Christian school very young and being taught the traditional Holy Trinity of the Father, Son, and the
Mm-hmm.
Holy Ghost, and how masculine that is, and where
Mm-hmm.
is the deep women's embodiment in that?
Right. Right.
Where's the womb wisdom? And
Yeah.
to me, I'm kind of redefining that as like my Holy Trinity, and the lens that I see my somatic work is like creating secure attachment with our inner children, God, and others. And that's like the Holy Trinity to me. And within that, it kind of breaks down into the work. So, like our secure attachment with our inner children, there's like so many different parts, from how we learn to relate to our inner children with resonance rather than just reassurance,
Right.
starting to cultivate our inner divine masculine and feminine energies within us. Or if some people don't like that, then we could think about it as yin and yang energies that we all
Right.
possess, that has nothing
Right.
to do with gender. And starting to build safety within us there, like a solid foundation. Like I
Yeah.
think with my disorganized attachment, my question to myself, I always felt unstable. Like I just felt like I had this like scarlet letter, like of I'm unstable or something. What's wrong
Mm.
with me? And it became outsourced to partners or people and needing things outside of me. But then cultivating this in myself allowed me to then be able to create secure attachment with others in relationship, because then I have the foundation within myself to feel like they can meet me or they may not, and I will still be okay. I will
Yeah.
always have me. I will never abandon me.
Yeah.
And so there's that like secure attachment with inner child, with others, and then also the secure attachment with God. And part of that work is examining how some of our religious upbringing has instilled shame and guilt around sexuality and expression and aliveness and our darker,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful emotions like rage, grief,
Yeah.
ugliness.
Right.
That's not an emotion, but
Right.
um, including that in with God, like, so often what happens in my sessions, people are like, I just felt like I couldn't connect to God or goddess. Like I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
feeling calm. I wasn't feeling in my center. And I'm like, so do you think, so you have an inherent belief that God, goddess, like doesn't include your ugliness, your terror,
Mm-hmm.
that's,
Right.
they like, you're still held and loved within that. And then often that we can kind of start to examine to the mother wound and the father wound, and that how that
Yeah.
kind of breaks our attachment to the divine God, goddess energies, and our innate sense of belonging and being held and being worthy and always provided for. And so that's kind of like the whole map that I feel like is like a culmination of what I've come to understand this work as.
Mm. I love that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. That's so amazing. Um, I know the first time when we decided to, when I asked you to be on the podcast and you were telling me about this, I was just like so blown away. Just like scrambling, like writing down as much as I could. Um, Tell me how that, okay, so we could either go into like the resonance piece of that, which might be also the divine inner union, or if there was anything else about that that we missed.
Yeah. Was that what you were saying before about attachment and resonance and compassion?
Yeah, so I've been going through this taped training bit by bit because there's so much juicy stuff in there. And it's from an EMDR model along with attachment model and relating to chronic illnesses as well.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I just loved having more science to back up was this idea that empathy is not what heals, right? And as a
Hmm.
person who grew up feeling like I was a sponge for everyone's hurt and like had to fix it, that was so re reaffirming of all the healing work I've done, right? That I can turn the dial down on my empathy. And that's
Mm-hmm.
actually like not only good for me, but it might actually even be better for other people because what I need and they need is that resonance. They need attunement
Mm-hmm.
and presence and regulation and co-regulation, not empathy. Like in
Yeah.
compassion gets thrown around a lot these days, but I really do also love compassion and self-compassion is really important. But I think the resonance and the presence gets to such a deeper level of embodiment there than
Mm-hmm.
even compassion does.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. Wait, the resonance, can you say that again?
Yeah. The resonance gets to a deeper level than even compassion does. It feels to me, at least, the
Yeah.
level of what we associate compassion with these days.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he
Like, and
said resonance, attunement, and presence.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. And
Yeah.
yeah, I've been learning from Sarah Payton's work, and she is family constellations, nonviolent communication, and
Love that.
um, she she teaches a lot on relational neuroscience, so like attachment, but with like the nerdy concepts of like the brain stuff, and that like I
Yes.
so love that.
Yes. Me too.
um, and her modality is called resonant language. And so she talks
Oh.
about, and she has this like really cute illustration of the brain where like the prefrontal cortex is like this character that like turns around and coddles the amygdala, which is like this baby in a little swaddle.
Oh my gosh, that is so great. I can't wait to look that up.
Yeah, and another way to think about it too, I think it's Dan Siegel's work where like if we think
Yeah.
about our brains, like this thumb is the
Hmm.
amygdala and then we wrap our hand around it, right? And that's the prefrontal cortex and our higher thinking brain. And like that's like what the resonant language does is like
Yes.
the amygdala when it's being hijacked like that, it just needs somebody to be guessing at our experience. Like
Right.
instead of saying like, you'll be fine
Right.
or it's
He's
gonna
like,
get
that's hard for
better.
you. Right.
Yeah, that's hard
Yeah.
for you. Or
Yeah.
like she has this exhaustive list of
She
emotions and
does. Oh my
feelings that I
gosh. That's
love.
so great.
Yeah. And it's almost like guessing at the like inner child's experience. Like, do you feel anguished? Do you
Right.
feel downtrodden?
Right.
And the inner child can be like, no, it's more like this. But it's just, it gives that relational
Mhm.
piece of
Yes.
what they didn't get, which is getting to be seen and really get
Right.
specific on what they're
Right.
feeling.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the next step is like, oh, I I so understand that. Like, do you have a need for, and then she has an amazing list of needs as well, you
Oh my
know?
gosh. That makes me so happy. Yeah.
Yeah. And then working on a somatic level, it's like people experience almost immediate relief because
Hmm.
that's the constriction. There's like an
Right.
inner child that has a need and is in terror, alarmed
Right.
aloneness, as she calls it.
Right.
And
Hmm.
then that's one way to
Oh,
work
I
through
love
that
that.
constriction into like expansion.
Well, I'm excited to look her up.
Yeah. So,
Julianne Taylor Shore is someone I've been following for like self-compassion neuroscience, which has been great, but go ahead.
Julianne, I gotta like follow all these people.
I
Taylor,
know.
Julianne Taylor, what?
Shore, Shore, I believe.
Yeah, I just like love that science
I
and
know.
spirituality
Right.
and everything are like linking up, you
I
know?
know. Me
It's like what
too.
I always knew when I was a kid, and now I'm like, I
Yes.
told you so, everyone.
I know. And it's so interesting. I had such a similar experience to you where like I had that mystical like sense of just playfulness and being and in the mystical union like as a kid and then that got broken.
Mm-hmm.
Um but I was always like had a little tiny bit of it or was trying to get back to it, right? So that's part of my language, even about returning to self-trust and like self-knowing is like coming back to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I wondered what it's like for people who are less contemplative and like have a different, I don't know, neurotype or different way of being. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is that their best grounding place or is it something else?
Mm.
or it just takes longer, or I don't
You,
know.
you mean like to be more intuitive and spiritual?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like, again, my reality can be different from
Yeah,
everybody else's,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
that I forgot her name, but she's a psychiatrist that went holistic, and she's a very controversial person sometimes, but oh, I always like
Let
forget
me
her
know when you
name.
think about it. I do too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But the word is complementarity that I've really loved, and
I
like
like
this
that.
idea that we are all puzzle pieces, and we forget that in our like society that's trying to make, one side wrong and my side right.
Right,
And that's all like a trauma response, right? Because we don't
right,
feel safe in our bodies. So we have to
right,
make our identity
right.
everybody else's,
Yeah,
when there's so much release and just being like, well, maybe they just function that way better. And for
yeah.
the longest time, I couldn't, I was on this crusade of like, no, we must, be more intuitive, and and honestly, like my whole
Right, I
practice is
know.
built on that. So that's who I serve.
Right,
Those
me
are the people
too.
I serve, and that's my
Hmm.
messaging.
Yep.
But I'm open to maybe just rational for some people. Maybe
Yeah.
they can
Well, I
survive like
think
that.
I know that I don't understand it enough to help as well as I can with the more intuitive people. But I'm just, I don't know, always curious about what are other people's like grounding places that's really good for them.
Mm,
Right.
right.
So I was thinking even recently, like, I know very little about sports, but that is a place where there's so much play and connections and strategy and excitement and togetherness and anticipation and learning. And there's so much wrapped into that like that is a place that I think people find a lot of like those needs met.
Yeah,
That is not my
definitely.
realm, right? But
Totally.
like I'm so glad that that is another place for that.
Mm-hmm.
um
Or like theater or
mhm.
comedy, all of
Yeah,
these. Um, yeah. Yeah, like everybody has their safe place. Golf.
yeah, yeah, I know.
Not mine, but
When you're talking about the puzzle pieces, it made me think one of the things I want to explore more because I don't know enough about quantum physics to know, but like I envision as kind of like atoms where like you can be denser and closer together, or you can be further apart depending on what you need at the moment, or if you're more excitable, or
mm,
if you're like cooler, that the temperature changes that and different needs at different times, but you are always the same entity. But the
mm.
way you're showing up and like expanding or contracting and moving around in space and who you're around is different, right?
Yeah, I love that. Like because like that one of the few things I remember from like science in grade school is like the atoms make up the whole,
Yes.
right? I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess my image for it has been like the mycelium network, like the
Yes.
underground mushrooms, and how they are
Yes.
all intertwined, and you see one light up and that affects like all of these networks of other ones.
Yes.
And that
Right.
has really helped me on my path as a practitioner and as just like a person of like, I can't heal. I can't be here for everyone. I can't
Right.
be the voice,
Right.
speak to
Exactly.
everyone. Um, and it feels safe for me and my
Right.
body to know that like
Yes.
I'm not the expert at everything. And
Right.
even like this round for Awakening the Wild Woman, it feels so good. I mean, I had guest teachers last time too, but there
Mm-hmm.
was like a feeling in me of like, well, I need to be also an expert at rage and
Mm-hmm.
womb facilitation and the Hindu goddesses and everything. But like,
Mm-hmm.
I could, like people have
Right.
specialized in that. Like
Right.
that's been their thing. So
Exactly.
like, why wouldn't I just pull in that
Right.
like facilitator for
Right.
that?
Right.
Like, what is
Yeah.
this weird expectation that I think I need to know it all in order to be worthy or
Mm-hmm.
legitimate or trusted?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know this is a weird like image that may not translate to other people, but it's the one I've had today of the pollinators, right? Taking a little bit of pollen from each plant, right?
Hmm.
Where you're like, we are sampling, and even as we're talking together, and then we're sharing other people that we're connected to, right? That are giving us life, and they're giving life to
Hmm.
more people and receiving life and whatever. Like it's just this interconnected, like
Yeah.
gooey, like deliciousness, you know, like I don't know that I
Yeah.
want to go like, I'm thinking like cinnamon roll ooey gooey, and then I was thinking like, but also the mycelium network, and also like hives, and also like spider webs, and also, you know, anything that's so lovely interconnected that all you have to do is be and be in
Yes.
the web, right? Like
Yes. Oh
you don't have to
God, even
perform, you don't have to rescue, you don't have to do anything but be.
we do some good healing on our own, and
Mm-hmm.
then the next step is social connection, attachment. We're
Right,
wired for
right.
that.
Yeah.
Like even as you were, in my image channel, my channel of knowing,
Yes.
as I was
Love that. Me too.
imagining, yeah, the pollinators and everything, like I felt like that my upper spine was like really like tight, and then like as you were saying that,
Mm.
it like expanded, and my shoulders came back, and I felt like a big weight or like air was like being lifted from
Oh,
me,
I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I feel like for some reason this feels like the place to stop with just the delicious connection
Mhm.
that I'm feeling, and I just feel so grateful and met, and just yeah, grateful to have you
Yeah.
on here and grateful to know you.
Me too, Catherine. I'm so
Yeah.
excited to be journeying with you for 6 months, and so excited for what you're going to add to the group too. You have
Yeah.
such deep wisdom to share and such a special viewpoint, and it's like so heartwarming just to see that within our system, right? That,
Yeah.
licensed therapists have this depth and curiosity and
Yes.
thirst to bring their full selves in. And that gives me a lot of optimism
Yeah.
when I feel like for a while, my trauma response was like crying out in the
Mhm.
corner, like very anti-establishment. And
Oh,
now,
well, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, and
I
now
mean,
the
managed care is hard.
yeah, it's fucked, but at the same
Yeah.
time, I feel like it feels so heartwarming to come into this integration of starting to realize like, ooh, the systems are changing slowly. Like there's people like you in the system, and that's just I feel like if we don't have that hope, it's quite hard to exist
Yes.
in this time.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tammy. And hopefully I'll have little updates for you all about how the program has been for me as I'm like journeying with Tammy. And we will talk to you later.
All right, bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being a part of our collective care and meaning making on who we are and what we need. Leave a review, subscribe, and follow us on socials at Catherine Quiring and at Who We Are Pod. This is your host, Catherine Quiring, signing off. See you again soon.